African American century. African American century. This is the men. Let's talk about the men because the men made a difference too. So we got Matthew Henson, born 1866 to 1955, the explorer. Matthew Alexander Henson was the co-discoverer of the North Pole in 1909, along with Admiral Robert E. Peary and 3 unit men, which mean Eskimos. And they were the first people to reach the pole in the long and treacherous history of Arctic exploration. Henson's victory was a Pyrrhic, I guess mean horrible one. I don't know. However, diminished by racism in America. Henson was never mentioned in the time of the discovery, and only in 1948 were his achievements truly acknowledged. So even though he went to the North Pole in 1909, he did not get recognition until 1948. But thank God he got recognition because there's still some people who have accomplished a lot of stuff in our history. That's why I say our history, and they have not got any recognition even unto this day. But anyway, it said although Europeans dominated exploration in the late 19th century, at the turn of the 20th century, with the closing of the American frontier, Americans turned their eyes to the rest of the world. It was a period of discovery and adventure with the opening of the Panama Canal and Atlantic, with the Pacific and Wright brothers cross distance by air. Of course, African Americans had been on the move since the Civil War. They traveled in search of family and members that were sold through slavery. So they was looking for their family at this time. But he was one of those people that went to the North Pole. Matthew Henson. Then we got Jack Johnson, born 1878 to 1946, the boxer. When you hear about the Great White Hope, the idea of the Great White Hope had to be invented. More than any other sport, boxing provoked the deepest white anxiety about Black manhood and Black equality. Replete with social and cultural symbolism, the sport assumed a heightened racial aura throughout the 20th century, from Johnson's day to the day of Muhammad Ali. Two muscle, almost naked men dance in a grueling fight to a knockout, an end that symbolically, purposely imitates the form of death. In the early part of the century, whites feared that Blacks would interpret any victory of Black boxers over white boxers in fair public bouts as a sign of the inherent equality with white America. This anxiety was well grounded. Of course, boxing victories were interpreted this way by Blacks and whites alike. And this is what happened when African American John Arthur Jack Johnson took the world heavyweight title in 1908 from Tommy Burns with a mocking ease, and then went on to defeat the greatest white boxers of his time, such as Jim Jeffries. For the rest of Johnson's career, the boxing establishment was in search of the Great White Hope, a boxer who would redeem the racial order. This is where the Great White Hope came from. They was looking for somebody to whoop Jack Johnson, because Jack Johnson was a heavyweight, and every time he got in the boxing ring, he won. And so they was looking for somebody of the opposite color to go against him to bring them some hope. Woo! Mm-mm-mm. That's why he was called the Great White. That's why they was looking for the Great White Hope. Man, you like, where these, we hear the movies and stuff, but where it come from? You know what I'm saying? Now you know. Okay, Booker T. Washington. A lot of people did not like Booker T. Washington. Woo! He was born 1856, they think, and he died in 1915. So they really don't know, because back in the day, they really didn't. A lot of masters and a lot of people who owned slaves, they didn't really write down people's birth dates down. So a lot of people didn't know when he was born. They just gave a date. But he was a controversial person, and it's a lot to read about him. I'm trying to see, what do I want to say about him. Well, let's say it this way. A lot of people didn't like him because he said it is your fault that you are not successful as a Black person. It is your fault that you have that slave mentality. It is your fault. Now, this is the early 1900s, where people just got out of slavery, where they were still working hard but only getting a penny or a nickel or a dime, literally, for their work. And he was telling them at that time, we want to talk about, they was still at the time where it said Black only. Well, they didn't say Black, they said color only and whites only, and you couldn't walk in the front of nowhere. Every building that the white people walked in, you could not, if you was Black, you could not walk in the front door. You had to go in the back door. And around this time, Booker T. Washington was telling Black people it was their fault that they are limited. It's their fault that they don't have anything. So yeah, a lot of people didn't like him. A lot of people did not like him at all. So that's all I'm going to say about him. You can read about him on your leisure time. Okay, so we got Thomas A. Dorsey, the father of gospel music, from 1899 through 1993. Although now remembered as the father of gospel music, Thomas Andrew Dorsey, in fact, had two careers. One as a creative composer of religious music based on African American traditions. The other is Para Rim as a major composer and performer of lowdown blues. Dorsey was born in 1899 in Villarica, Georgia, and grew up steeped in the musical wealth of the Black church, where his father was a preacher. In 1908, the Dorseys moved from the country to the nearest big city in Atlanta, where young Thomas was exposed to secular music, including the urban blues of Bessie Smith and Ma Rainey. And at 12, he was a pianist. And by his late teens, he had left for freedom and promise of the North, moving to Chicago in 1916. So he had a variety of music career. And this is a picture of Thomas Dorsey. Wait a minute. There you go. That's a picture of Thomas Dorsey. I have pictures of the Jack Jackson. Probably did. Yeah. Let me show you Jack. There go Jack the boxer. And here go a picture of Matthew Henson. Picture of Matthew Henson. There you go. Okay. Sorry about that for not giving y'all pictures of the people who I was talking about, so y'all know who I was talking about. Okay, we got James Weldon Johnson, the Renaissance man, born 1871 through 1938. James, let me see. We got all this. Okay, Johnson's career was a combination of high literary achievement He was famous for his novels. One is the autobiography of ex-colored man and his collection of poems, God's Tombstones, and with an active political life, he was fundamental in the early successes of NAACP, and he served as a U.S. consul in Venezuela and Nicaragua. And in the words of one of the chroniclers of his career, Sandra K. Wilson Johnson was a songwriter, poet, novelist, diplomat, playwright, journalist, and champion of human rights. His curiosity was over the top. His courage and incredible, his commitment and influential, and people love him. This is James Warden Johnson. Trying to make sure. Okay. I know. Like that, you could tell us the history. You can't get the pictures. That's hard to get on here. But anyway, Charles Henry Turner, an entomologist from 1867 to 1923. This is a guy who was fascinated with ants. As a child, he watched their lives otherwise unnoticed beneath the hard pavement and in abundant lots. Swarming from one destination to another, he was equally curious about all small creatures that crawl or flew. And as an adult, he wrote nature studies of children and composed a book of poems. But first and foremost, Turner became one of the most respected. They respected him of his day through his observations of the behaviors of the smaller insects, particularly bees. And I'm telling him and I would have got along because my mother used to, whew, I used to get on her nerves as a child. I love insects. The thought that this little tiny little bugs could just move around, do things, just fascinated me too. So we would have just got along because I just loved that how God could just make something so tiny and I just watch it and just oh, I was like, how? And I used to ask my mom, how big is their brain? But he studied this and learned about their lives and everything. And I'm telling you, it's amazing. It's just amazing how people can just actually take time and study it. And I love it. That's my kind of guy right there. Then you get Junius. Did I show you a picture of him? Sure didn't. Here goes Charles Henry Turner. Charles Henry Turner. Okay, now let's go to the next person because I don't want to stay in it too long. Junior C. Austin, the dancing political preacher from 1887 to 1968. Before Gardner Turner, Sandy Ray, Samuel Proctor, J.H. Jackson, and Martin Luther King Jr., all 20th century preachers of enormous influence. There was Junius C. Austin, a pastor for 42 years of the third largest Baptist church in America. Austin was the first respected orator of this day. He was also an activist and pragmatic preacher who worked closely with Gravies, UNIA, Du Bois, NAACP, A. Philip Randall's Brotherhood of Sleeping Car Porters, MME. He also worked with C.J. Walker's Business Enterprise, Bill Thompson's Republican political machine in Chicago. He also worked with Carter G. Woodson's Association for the Study of Negro Life and History. He also worked with the Elks, the Masons, the Knights of Pybus, the Independent Order of St. Luke. Because his style was so smooth and his movements was so syndicated, he was called the dancing preacher because he got along with everybody and everybody got along with him. He knew how to bring peace in a situation. He knew how to get along with everybody. And his name is Junius C. Austin. And here goes his family. He knew how to get along. Then you got Ernest Everett Just, the biologist, from 1883 to 1941. Ernest Everett Just was a brilliant biologist who sought freedom from racism in the objective truth of science. A professor of biology at Howard University for more than 30 years, Just was the first great modern African American scientist. He was awarded the NAACP Springer Medal in 1915 for his work on the embryo of marine inver- invertebrates. Invertebrates. I know my students gonna say, "What is wrong with my teacher?" She know that. I know, honey. I know. But when you've been away from this language so long, sometimes your brain be like, "What?" So anyway, again, 1939. He had published The Biology of the Cell Surface, 1939, a groundbreaking text based on research at the Marine Biology Center at Woods Hole, Massachusetts in the 1920s. And in Europe in the 1930s, Jess research concentrated on the process of fertilization as well as on perithonogenesis, the development of unfertilized eggs. He discovered the fundamental role played by protoplasm, the substance that lies outside of the nucleus of the cell, in cell development, including its influence in hereditary. So you got Ernest Everett Just, the biologist, and here go his picture. Picture of Ernest. There you go. Ernest. All right. Then we got we got Oscar. I can't pronounce this is French, so I guess it's Macha. Macha. He was a cinematographer from 1885 to 1951. Oscar captured on film the color heart. At least that's what he intended to do. Not only did he run his own production company, he also wrote, directed, filmed, and edited his own films. Sound familiar? This guy did this in the early 1900s. So something what Tyler Perry is doing today. He did this in the early 1900s. He transported these black and white reels from color-only cinemas to Negro church halls by bus, car, and on foot, and even persuaded white Southern theater owners and urban Northern cinema managers to show his race films at their segregated theaters. His goal was to convince a suspicious African American audience that fully developed, non-stereotypical black characters could exist on the screen, meaning you're not going to see your typical maids and slaves. You're going to see real people with real lives and real stories. That's my kind of guy right here. With the latest technology in his hands, Oscar released over 43 dramas, 27 silent movies, 16 sound films. He was beyond his time, only 10 of which have survived. And in these films, he sought not only to counter the cruel stereotypes of the day, but to dramatize his generation's aspirations of social acceptance and assimilation. Frat with his unresolved racial tensions, these films often depicted an uncritical black, well as light completed actors. So a lot of people didn't like him either. So they said he was being biased. He only wanted certain colored people in his films. Moreover, Oscar dealt with a real frightening themes, filming ideas that other filmmakers refused to touch. For instance, Lynching Within Our Gates, 1919, dealt with the cruel and barbaric American sport that had been celebrated in D.W. Griffith's classic film, Birth of a Nation. See, it was all right for them to do Birth of a Nation because Birth of a Nation, they look at it as a sport to kill. So when he did his Lynching Within Our Gates, they said, how dare this man of color mimic us, copy us? How dare he do that? hmm But he was trying to show them that even though y'all looked at it as being funny, it's not funny. It is not funny. And Birth of a Nation was applauded by President Woodrow Wilson. hmm Yeah, I'm just saying. Then we got Bill Bojangles Robinson. We know Bojangles. We hear about Bojangles chicken, right? Where you think they got that from? Bojangles. But let's talk about his life right now. The tap dancer. We don't know what year he was born. They said maybe 1878, but they know what time he left. He left here in 1949. So they said on his 65th birthday, he tap danced 65 blocks up Broadway and block for each year. Bill Bojangles Robinson was the primary African American dancer of the day. Like many other black artists, he is remembered not only for his extraordinary talent, but because he was able to cross over. Not unlike other key figures, he moved across the line separating the black world from the white, bringing with him the genes of black culture, but modified in ways that made it comprehensible and appealing to white people. Elian Locke believed Robinson's tap dancing was symbolic to sounds in which he heard the African heritage. Robinson turned those sounds into percussive sounds that made it part of the most African form of music and jazz. He was democracy in action, improvisational, flexible, fluid, protein, and experimental with and on his feet. They love when he tap dance. And so there's when I read these stories, there's more to that, but people sue you over everything, so can't read all of it. But what happened was Bojangles, um, he got a picture of him. When they did open up the restaurant of Bojangles, his family members said, "You do know his name after our dad, blah blah blah." And it's like, and so they did not give him. They did not give him or his family credit. Yeah, but one thing I can say, that chicken do taste good, and you have a lot of Bojangles restaurants down south, and their side tastes good and everything. And yeah, I was eating their chicken, and then I said, let me read about the history. Yeah, so just letting you know. Still won't give that man his credit today or his family. Then we got Dr. Charles R. Drew. Everybody should know about Dr. Charles R. Drew. Let me clap for him. Yes, we know about Dr. Martin Luther King. We know about so many people. But there are so many people who don't give their justice their due. But this is one person right here. He was a real doctor. This is a person who we really should give honor to. For real. The Blood Man, 1904 through 1950. As a surgeon, a teacher, a researcher, Charles Richard Drew saved lives. That's why a lot of us are still alive today with those blood transfusion. In 1942, he became the director of the Red Cross effort to collect and store blood on a large scale. He did it. Nobody else did. He founded two of the world's largest blood banks, and his research on the storage of shipment of blood plasma, blood without the red blood cells, prevented millions of deaths. After World War II, he practiced surgery at Howard University and became the first African American surgeon to serve as an examiner on the National Medical Examination Board. He was national, but he actually helped people international. Dr. Charles R. Drew, I clap my hands for you. Woo! I clap my hands for you. He is the reason why we have blood banks. He is the reason why when people get rushed to the hospital, maybe because of gunshot or whatever, and they need blood, he is the one. But we don't give him credit. A lot of people, when I was teaching in the classroom, I said, do y'all know who Charles Drew is? It was like, we don't even know who he is. Everybody should know who he is. When it comes to these blood places where they collect blood, they need to have his name. They need to have a picture on a wall, because he is the reason why they have these blood centers. He is the reason. He showed them how to preserve blood. He showed them how to preserve plasma. What is plasma? When you fall down and hurt yourself, you see that clear stuff that comes up. It's not blood, that's plasma. He knew how to take that, separate it. Oh my goodness. This man was well known, and he saved millions of people. And even though he is not here today, he is still saving millions of people because God gave him an idea and showed him how to preserve blood, a living source. And the sad part about this, when he was in a car accident, because he was a black man, oh yeah, because he was a black man, they did not rush him to the hospital. So somebody had to take him. They got him to one hospital. They said, oh no, he can't come here. No, he got to go to the black hospital. They said, well, do you know who this is? We don't care who he is. We don't care who he is. They look at his skin and say, we don't care who he is. If we're not going to take care of him, we're not going to help him. So by the time he got to the second hospital, he died. This is a man who helped a lot of people. And look, they might not say it, but I will. They killed that man because of the color of his skin. And he was the one who preserved and still helping people live today, because God showed him how to preserve blood. Dr. Charles R. Drew. Let me clap my hands again. Nobody else knew how before he came. Nobody else knew but him. I'm just saying. The things our people suffer with. This is our last person I'm going to read about. Adam Clayton Powell Jr. King of Harlem. Born 1908 through 1972, Adam brought Harlem to Congress, minister, politician, public figure. Powell forced the city, state, and federal governments to make room for African Americans and their representatives. He was born on November 29, 1908, in New Haven, Connecticut, where his father was a student at the Yale Divinity School. When the younger Powell was just a baby, Adam Clayton Powell Sr. was called to lead the Baptist Church, then located in Midtown Manhattan's Tenderloin District. Powell Sr. energized his congregation and soon moved it to Harlem, where real estate was less expensive and where Harlem rapidly was becoming the heart and soul of Black America. Blond as a child, Adam Clayton Powell Jr. grew up aware that he was able to pass for white. Both his parents had fair complexions, and outside of Harlem, young Powell was often assumed to be white. He grew into a tall, handsome youth, very much interested in girls and considered a bit wild for a minister's son. After excelling at Townsend Harris Hall, a private high school, Powell enrolled in New York City's college in the fall of 1925, but the lure of nightlife and women derailed his studies. And after his 2 semesters, the senior Powell pressured his son to start over in less distracting circumstances. And Powell entered the Colgate University, an overwhelmingly white school in rural Hamilton, New York, in 1926. There he weathered an awkward first year. His classmates were not sure of his race, and he nearly faced disaster for dating white women. But he went on to befriend his fellow black students and to win both academic and social acclaim. This is Adam Powell. You people, um, remember, if you had one drop of black blood, you was considered black. It didn't matter how fair your skin was, and people who was very, very fair was considered mulattoes because they can pass for a white person. But he used this to, gain information. Then he was able to help the black culture. So he did do good at the end. But again, I have to just give a clap again to Dr. Charles or Drew. I hope that your children, your grandchildren, and your children's children, your neighbors, and everybody know about Dr. Charles or Drew. So when you had those car accidents and when you have auto incidents and you're in the hospital and you have to get your blood taken and you have to get a blood transfusion, think about Dr. Charles or Drew, because he is the reason why you are still here today, him and God, because God gave him the remedy to show him how to preserve blood so we can stay alive. So you thank Charles for that. Thank you, Lord, for using Charles. So I'm praying, you know how I mean, you know how I am, those who know me. Praying that you have a blessed day. Because it's we enter in February with Black History Month, and they only give us a few days. So my goal is to talk about Black history. That's my goal. You all have a blessed day. Okay?